at last. Got it, indeed, we have. Eve has taken over a daunting task left by the late and very lamented Catherine, who many of you knew. And I'll say this, we have in some ways a hard act to follow, but at the same time, it's called hitting the ground running. As some of you will be aware, was it the Chancellor, was it Boris himself, made the decision yesterday that Jacob Rees-Mogg is now the new Brexit minister. And he's already said he wants to overhaul a lot of what's been going on. And of course, that includes our dear friends in Revenue and Customs. But it also means that the trader, you, everybody else, including Muggins, because I do various things in Europe from time to time, are going to have to look at exactly what we're doing. Because now all things like the new procedures, customs regulations concerning documentation, concerning transparency and all that goes on. You can be, in fact, he said this morning, what's next? There's going to be changes because it's clear that the government is finally flexing its muscles and is looking seriously at how this country is trading with not just Europe, but everywhere else. And the trouble is, guess who's the last to know? The exporter, Kelsier Prees. My view is, and I think Eve's is as well, you should be the first to know. This is why we have chambers of commerce. Chambers are the voice of the trading public, in the public in general. The chambers are the means, the conduit by which information comes down the line. And Eve and I are going to make sure that you get that information. Setting up bulletins, the chamber does them already for the members, but we are here to send you the information as it comes out, hot off the press, but then give you a chance to comment, hence the idea of the clinics, the forums, even, let's say, a chat forum whereby we set up through the website a facility that you can send in your remarks by chat. We will look at them, we will propagate them, disseminate them, whatever, but we will also bring everybody together to discuss the issues as they come out, to be there to say, oh yes, I've got this problem, or I didn't know that was happening. So it gives everybody a chance to not just learn, but equally to express opinions and say, why is it we haven't been told about this? What do we have to do? And so it goes on, because that, in my view, is self-help. And there's other forums I know in other areas, the chemical industry, particularly in West Yorkshire, or in Yorkshire in general, I'm already dealing with because I advise them on customs issues. Every other day, a bulletin comes out, something about chemicals. Well, if it's a case for a particular sector, shouldn't we have this now for anything that's related to export or even import? And that's where we intend to move on to, because it'll give everybody a chance to have an opinion, to voice their opinions, comments, and where we can do so, we can then lobby people like British Chambers of Commerce, even government, other big organizations to find out what's going on. That's what that's going to do. Anyway, without more ado, it's good seeing you all, some of whom I know already anyway, so it's good to welcome you back. It's good to have you on board. It's also good to start the year, well, starting the year has been done a while ago, but with a new clean sheet, and this time with a dynamic approach, and that's what we need to look at. Anyway, without more ado, I want to take you through today a brief overview of what is now happening, because all sorts of little things have come out of the press. Oh yes, more delays of all the trailers through Dover and places like this. Well, at least in our case, it's not been caused by Canadian truckers blocking the Ambassador Bridge between Detroit and Windsor. Lack of political correctness again. I'm not going to comment on that. I do have my own views. But we do know that there are issues affecting exporters to do with delays, to do with paperwork, and the fact that the new changes beginning this year have created issues with regard to, oh, what are we supposed to do? Now, the usual, when you want to export, are your documents and procedures right? This I put in any of the presentations because it's a lot of what goes on. But I think it underlines all the main problems that we have. And I say all the main problems because any trader, and I don't think I need you to tell me this, is faced with a variety of challenges concerning how they are getting their consignments to their customers. Well, in hope, because there's no guarantee that things will happen the way that they're supposed to. And with my ear to the ground, I'm already discovering there are huge issues concerning customers saying, oh, we need you to supply this, or we can't get that through, or it's costing us a shed load of money. Well, it may be, but the thing is, did the customer tell you what they wanted in the first place? Well, hopefully they did. But you see, a lot of this is down to assumptions, but it's also down to, are we up to date? And that was the purpose of this webinar, to bring you up to date with some of what's going on. So Brexit, 1 year on, it's been a long time. It hardly seems like yesterday already. But here we are through the pandemic, through the initial throes of Brexit, and in a situation now where every time we blink, something else has happened, whether it's Northern Ireland, whether it's EU itself, whether it's rest of the world. Now, the first thing that you may be aware of is that the original transitional arrangements that were there to simplify movements of goods between here and the continent and vice versa has now finished. HMRC told us late last year that the transition was going to go on the 31st December and that there wouldn't be any more simplification unless you physically applied for it. And I seem to remember a certain Helen who's sitting with us. We had endless fun, did we not, with simplification and the IDR, and quite simply asked ourselves, why on earth are we doing it, considering it was brickbats all the way, wasn't it? She not,
definitely, the consumption of gin went up during that period, Mark.
I think it most certainly did, but having said that, it kept us all active, but it proved, and this is where I can be slightly more serious about it, it proved that even HMRC made far too many assumptions and didn't actually know what the trader was looking for. And regrettably, I still think that's the case. I've seen too many bits of correspondence between companies and the department that tells me that the department does not have experts on board and that they do not understand what a lot of companies are trying to do. Now, amidst that, every company is different. Every one of you has a different business, different markets, different customers, different modus operandi, different means. Now then, that is why everybody needs an individual answer. However, there are standard practices that HMRC have introduced that should apply as a sort of one-stop shop to everybody. Now, Helen's alluded this morning to the IOSS, the import one-stop shop that the Europeans have got, but we haven't yet subscribed to, other than Northern Ireland. And this is an area, although not today as such, this is an area I will be coming on to because it concerns small parcel deliveries and the fact that many of you already deal with fast track courier services, the likes of UPS, the likes of Hermes, DPD, and so on, and that many of you may well already have had problems. And basically, this is going to be an area that the Chamber looks at because it's small parcel deliveries, but it's still exports and it's still money. And that's why we need to look at these issues seriously. And we may well be lobbying BCC and a few more people as time goes on as to why we haven't got access to some of these facilities. So rest assured, we are going to be dealing with a lot of this. It's topical, it's major areas, and we believe that we have that ability to talk to others on your behalf and certainly advise you as we go along. So I think this is one area we put down. E-commerce, as we did mention, it is important, and you can be sure we are going to deal with it. We now have full customs procedures, which means full declarations. You have to have your agent doing a declaration on your behalf. Easier said than done. The fact that up to now, it hasn't been a huge issue. It hasn't been something that many people have considered important. But I will come on this morning to issues that have arisen over the past few months, and indeed HMRC have very subtly put on their website. And unfortunately, it means more bureaucracy, although there is a method behind the madness, and I will come on to it because of the role I play and the experience I've had. What we do have is tighter controls. The single market for us has well and truly gone. We no longer have that, and that indeed means Northern Ireland. And again, Northern Ireland is an issue we will be concentrating on because, again, of the protocol and all the problems there are associated with it. But suffice to say, government is now putting a lot more control on how goods are moving from A to B. And if you think we're doing it, you go across the channel and you look at what they're doing on the continent. And I think many of you may already have come across this. And this is why we want to set up the export forums and the clinics, because we want you to tell us what your problems are. And in fact, I'd say today is the start of that. We want you to start corresponding with us, send in your emails, tell us the problems you're having, and we will then help you to resolve them. I'm not saying we can supply the Harry Potter wand that waves magically and everything comes into life, because it doesn't. But what we will do is address the problems. Now, I know it's easy for any MP to say that as well, and I'm quite sure that Tim Farron and a few more would be saying that anyway to the constituents. But the point being, we are here to help you. And I would encourage this. I know it hasn't happened too much. There was a bit of it last year. And again, because the people I know going to see them and they talk to me about it. We now need to make this ongoing. We now need you to tell us what are the problems you're having. Can they be resolved? That's what we're here for. So that's the basic scenario. It means that exporters now have far more work to do, dare I say, than they ever did in the past. And this goes back to the days I still remember of when we first joined the single market, and indeed going back to when we joined the European communities, when I was still a lad as well. I was going back some years, but never mind. This is all part and parcel of what we're dealing with, and it's here to stay. Now then, I know quite a few of you have issues with Incoterms. It's already been said this morning. This is not an Incoterms session, and I don't intend to go through all the rhymes and reasons, all the whys and the wherefores, and what do the terms mean. But two primary things have come out, and this is very definitely something that we have to contend with. A lot of you, and I'm not going to issue straw poll, but I am going to ask all of you, do you use Xworks? And I don't think you need to tell me unless you want to raise your hands. Xworks has been a standard use for Incoterms, and I assume makes an ass out of you and me, of course, that many of you have used or do use Xworks for your shipments. Am I correct? A few of you sitting there anyway, so silence is golden, but it is certainly a prevalent issue. Many companies have used Xworks for years because they've got the customer to come in and pick the consignment up. Now, HMRC and indeed the International Chambers of Commerce have said Xworks should not be used. It's not even an international term. And it means that you can get the customer to pick the goods up and take them no further than Runcorn. But it is now becoming a huge issue because of a lack of export evidence. And HMRC have actually stated, and I've seen this on their notices now already and their guidances, that if you do use Xworks, you should be charging the customer the VAT as if it was a domestic transaction. And if you want to avoid that, then you should be using FCA. In fact, HMRC have actually said so far as that the European customer should have a VAT number and an EORI here in the UK. Well, I tell you now, through bitter experience, it takes a company 6 months, if they're, let's say, European based, to get a UK VAT number. So this is not a soft option. This is not something that you click your fingers and magically there it is, because it ain't going to happen. Ex Works is one of these vicious areas that HMRC are clamping down. And obviously they're not going to talk to all the European companies, are they? But it would mean that you, as an exporter, would have to tell your European customer that if they really want to use Ex Works, they should be getting an EU VAT number. That'll be fun. Excuse me. That can go safely there. Now, the issue with all this is that when we're dealing with fairly basic elements, we're not necessarily going to get told by the authorities what we should be doing. And this is why one of the first things I recommend, and Helen's brought this up, and I think a few more of you would do, is to look at your basics. How are you trading with your customers? Even I are here to help you. This is all part of business development. But we're here to get you to start looking seriously at what you're actually doing, because a lot of the main problems can come from something as simple as your use of Incoterms. So it's always a good idea when a new year comes in, new broom, sweeps clean, why don't we go back to the basics? Let's have a look at how we're trading, because that's going to tell us a lot as to whether we've got any control or not. So if Ex Works isn't going to be used, what would we use in place of it? The answer is free carrier, because then we then make sure that the goods are on the vehicle, we've got a POD or 2 or 3, and that we are happy enough that that consignment is going to go across the North Sea or the Channel or wherever and is going to hit the continent. The thing is, if the customer's then arranging that, they've got to arrange all the costs to go with it. And that means they're going to get hit with the bill. Well, they should know what they're doing, we hope. But it means that there is more emphasis now on this relationship between ourselves and the buyer. And that means planning. And one of the words that I always use is planning. Why? Because you can't do things ad hoc. At least say a customer suddenly rings you up or sends an email saying, I want such and such. Well, they may do. That's no problem. But then somebody's got to sit down and work out, well, okay, what's it going to cost? How much is it going to cost to get there? What paperwork do we need? Can we be sure it's going to happen? Because if something goes wrong, who's going to take the blame? Blame culture is a horrible thing, and we've seen it happen all the time. Or it's not my responsibility, it's somebody else's. The ball sits in somebody else's court. Well, maybe so. But yet again, we come back to this issue of agreements. Have we done our negotiation? After all, in business, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. Well, a lot of this is sitting down in advance with the buyer and saying, how are we going to do this? And then we reach some point of agreement in the middle. So on the first hand, right, so how are we going to get the goods there? So if we can't use Ex Works, what do we use? But then basically it's the sky's the limit, because anything between free carrier and then delivered at place, which is again one of the most common Incoterms there is fine, because that's flexible. After DAP, we have another lovely one that you may well have come across called DDP, Delivered Duty Paid. The customer wants us to deliver to the door and pay for it all. Well, in this country, not an issue, not even in Northern Ireland. But if it's going to somewhere like Europe, what they don't say is, oh, you're going to have an EU VAT number. Where are we going to get that? Well, whichever country you're exporting to. Could be the Netherlands, could be Germany, it could be Belgium, it could be a whole load of them. Some good news I do have for you. If you are exporting to France, I was actually on a call with a company last week called RM Boulanger, and I can send details to Eve. And by the way, they are very keen to talk to chambers because they operate a service for dealing with EU VAT numbers. And the guy I was speaking to, called Alan, is very, very keen to get to know companies and to get to know the chambers to offer their assistance. So I'll email you with his details, see what you think, because again, they are prepared to sponsor all sorts of events. So again, it's worthwhile knowing that there are people who are out there to help you. So you see, in reality, all hope is not lost. There is a solution for a lot of these issues, but it means that the export has now got to do a bit more spade work and possibly has to do a little more in the way of arranging things, formalities, making sure that they are covered, because if the customer says that's what they want, well, if you're going to keep the business, that's what you may have to do. So in some cases, it means a bit more work, that we maybe have to be a little more amenable to customers' requirements, especially when it comes to dealing with the EU and the formalities. So DDP could still be an option as long as you recognize that there are things you have to do in terms of getting a VAT number and possibly an EORI number in the continent. Now, it could be Ireland, it could be Netherlands, but the point is this still might be a necessity. So you see, in reality, we are still being asked to do things because either the customer cannot or does not want to do certain activities themselves. And I can understand why, especially if the customer is not that big and they don't really understand a lot of the procedures themselves anyway. Inevitably, we come on to the whole issue of documentation, paperwork. It would have been lovely to say everything was going to be simplified and it wasn't going to be difficult to do the job and everything would be automated and electronic. Another flying pig. It's not that easy when you've got everything else to do. As the old saying goes, it's a bit difficult to remember when you are up to your neck in alligators that the purpose of the exercise was to drain the swamp. Well, with paperwork, it's no different. And obviously, a lot of it comes down to pretty basic stuff like invoices, like maybe packing lists, and certainly things like transport documents, especially depending upon who's arranging a ship. But suffice to say, there is a need for full commercial invoices, and that has now been made very clear by a combination of customs, government, banks, and the list goes on. Similarly, does what it says on the tin, the good old packing list. Have we made sure that we are telling the customer what exactly we are sending to them? Whether it's about 2 kilos of shellfish off Morecambe Bay, or whether it happens to be maybe 20 particular engineered items, or whatever it may be. Because inevitably, we have to be able to tell both the carrier and the customer what that consignment is, because somebody might want to look at it at a frontier in France or the Netherlands or Belgium or whatever. And then the good old PODs. Now, when you're sending goods, let's say FCA or whatever, you may get some form of document from the carrier saying they picked it up. Well, yes. But the thing is it sufficient to say, is it proof of dispatch? Is it proof of delivery? And can we be sure that the carrier is going to get the goods from A to B the way we want them to? Especially, funnily enough, on small consignments. Let's say the consignment's worth no more than 150 quid. Well, you still want to make sure it's going to get there, because 150 quid is still a lot of money if a customer wants an individual item. And this is where we are going to be dealing with e-commerce, because again, it's major issues that companies send out small consignments, but they don't necessarily have a really substantial audit trail when it comes to paperwork. So we do have to look at things like this. And then, of course, transport documents. It's easy to say, oh, yes, we get a bill of lading for a container load going out to the Middle East or America. Well, maybe so, but what do you get if it's a UPS van or it's DPD? And well, they've been good at delivering stuff for us between sort of here in Glasgow or here in London up to now. Or are they any good at delivering it to Cologne or Munich? Well, again, it comes down to, is there a document that says that the carrier's picked the goods up and that there is a freight cost involved, and inevitably somebody has to pay it. Because although a lot of this is now electronic with good old tracking numbers and basically go online and register and there the details are, HMRC will still say, hang on a minute, we need proof of export. You need to make sure that you've got some form of transport document that shows that the goods left the country within this magical period of 3 months. And again, the number of companies I've looked at on my travels who don't keep that. Whether it's because the fact that they don't arrange the shipments per se, or quite simply nobody's ever sought to look at what documentation was necessary, I don't know. But it is an issue. And it's because of this that you lose track of what you're sending out. And if HMRC come back to you and say, can you prove it? And you say, well, no, they're going to charge you the VAT. And that's already happening, because insider knowledge between you and me, HMRC have been told to get the money. They're on targets, partly because of the pandemic and the Chancellor spending huge amounts of money on keeping everybody up afloat. Well, the government's got the money back. The government's got to get a way of doing it. And one of these is VAT. It's stealth, but this is what they're doing. And they're going to exporters and saying, can you prove you exported? Because if you can't, we're going to charge you that VAT. Oh, and by the way, we're going back 3 years. Not a nice thought, especially when the bill hits something like about 80 grand, if not more than that. There was one company I know in Sheffield that I dealt with, oh, it must have been about 2 years ago now. And this was through the chamber there. And all of a sudden, this rather horrid or panicky email, help, we need you to look at something. And the something was they'd been charged 990 grand's worth of that on all.
It's not just me that Mark's for mid-flow, is it?
Sorry?
That was about to be a really good story until you stopped.
Yes, and I've just got a message. Right, I will resume. It was this company in Sheffield. They got charged 990 grand's worth because they couldn't prove export. Now, I know that may be a bit of a, how shall I put it, an outlier, an exception, but I think it proves the point that HMRC will look at your VAT number and they'll look at your evidence. And if they don't like what they find, you might well end up getting a rather nice or otherwise VAT bill. So you see, the moral of the tale is audit trail. Documentary evidence. Do you have an audit trail in place? Because this is now what they expect of you. They've not said it as such. If you went on the website, you might find all the details. But you see, now is the time for you to start looking at all these issues. Take stock of what you're doing. Planning is one thing, and the other one says review. Every year, I always recommend to everybody I know, review what you're doing. Stand back, be objective. You've done a year's worth of training. Now then, review what you've been doing. Is it the right way of doing it? Have you got the paperwork? Have you got all the necessary procedures in place to make sure that you know what you're doing and that you can trace everything that's gone out of the door? Because sure as eggs being similar to coconuts and they've got a hard shell, you may find that it's not necessarily all there, that a lot of the paperwork may not be there at all. And even if your accountants don't pick it up, somebody else will. And that's usually called the department, because they look at your VAT number and your EORI, and they'll look to see all your transactions, and they'll find them, and they'll then want to know, where's the paperwork? Do you have it? Maybe, maybe not. now's the time to start looking. So before you reach for the bottle of vodka, make a few notes and say, right, what are we going to have to do? I could tell you all sorts of things, and that includes audits, and yes, keeping me and Eve and Tracy rather busy for the next 12 months. But it starts at your doorstep, looking to see what you're doing, because now HMRC are playing a very serious role. CEC proof of shipment. Then we have full export declarations. Anything in the way of consignments above £1,000. If it's a simplified declaration, it's usually because the consignment is less than 1,000, but it's above 135 quid. Below that, you don't really need much because it's sort of, well, very minimal value and doesn't really attract a lot of VAT or anything else. Now, the agents, a lot of companies say we leave it to our agent to do. Well, I don't have a problem per se with that. That's what freight agents are for. But HMRC is now saying, seller beware, even buyer beware. Is your agent doing the job for you? I've discovered in Eve's part of the world, and she'll know when I mention the name Cramlington as to what Cramlington is. Well, I was up at a company there 2 weeks ago dealing with a lot of issues, including export licenses. And would you believe their agents had simply done the job of getting goods moved and hadn't given them any paperwork at all? And this was dealing with things like export licenses. Oops! It shows you that even the big boys, and this was DHL, weren't sending the paperwork to the company. And this company is not a small one. It actually deals with electrically operated fans and things like that that go into trucks and buses and all the likes of it. And they've just been taken over by the Americans. So the Americans want compliance, compliance, compliance. So you can imagine now, oops, we have agents, and we're paying for them as well. We're spending, I don't know how much per month on things like movements and declarations and God knows what, and what were they getting in return? Zilch. So you see, there's this relationship with the agents as well. Are they doing the job properly? If you're paying them, you need to make sure that they are. And that means clearing goods on your behalf through customs, sending you the declarations, generating consignment reference numbers, and then sending you the paperwork accordingly. So you see, the agents have a big role to play, but are they doing it the way you're requesting? They can't simply look at the computer, use a crystal ball and say, oh, I see the consignment sitting on its pallet. I don't think that happens much. We're not into clairvoyance in this world, thank goodness. But what we are into is making sure the here and now, getting it done. Telling the agent, this is how we want you to move the goods. No problem, as long as the agent does it and sends you the details of declarations, transport documents, we're fine. But they may not be doing it, and you need to know why not, which means here's another point of review. And as I keep telling companies, here's something else. Every year you should get your agents into your office, complete with a cup of coffee and either some Jaffa cakes or marshmallows or, my God, goes back some years, wagon wheels, and get them to tell you what they're doing. Have a review of it all, and then basically a pep talk and say, what we want you to do is A, B, and C. Because every year, if you do that, you help the relationship, the agents know what you're doing, you know what they're doing, and everybody's happy bunnies, happy families. But the thing is, it still needs doing, because you need to review what's been going on so far and has it been happening the way that it should be. So more and more, we're looking now at this whole issue of relationships between yourselves and your clearing agents, your expediters, and so on, so that they know that you will instruct them as to what they're supposed to be doing. Because that way, it shouldn't go wrong too much. Occasionally, they'll get the glitches. We all know that. But basically, making sure that they have got everything sorted at their end, sorted, so that they send you the paperwork, but they know you're going to instruct them as to how you want goods clearing and how you want goods moving. So if you want it shipping by sea freight to New York, at least you'll tell them, well, we want you to arrange a 20-foot container to do it. Or if it's going to the continent, we need to make sure that you're going to supply us with the decorations and the consignment note and so on. So not huge issues, but it's called communication. And communication is a wonderful thing, as we know from Chinese whispers and whatever else. And you're not even giving them in some obscure language like Mandarin or whatever else. This is good plain English. Do they understand it? What is it? What part of thou shalt not do you not understand? It's not that they can't do it, but they need you to tell them what to do for each individual consignment. So that is part of the whole thing. And then this word we hate to talk about, customs, or even VAT. Why? It's called tax by another name. Now then, customs has now got the control over everything that both comes into this country and leaves it. Whether we like it or not, everything is subject to some form of declaration. But it also means now for you, this is when it starts getting a little bit technical and a little bit heavy, pre-clearance, because we now can't get goods into the EU unless they've been pre-cleared. Now, some of you may have come across that already because the trailer load has been pre-cleared, that the agents have said they need details of the manifest so that they can then get it cleared to get it on the ferry. That in itself is a technicality we didn't used to have to do, but it became mainly one of the main issues last year. But it means now we've got to do even more about making our consignment transparent, because if it isn't, it might not even get on the trailer, because we're having to tell the Brussels computer in advance, this is our trailer load. Are you prepared to accept it? And the Brussels system will hopefully say yes. Don't expect that'll always happen. It won't be the first time it says do not load, because the information is insufficient. So cargoes have to be pre-cleared before they get anywhere near the ferry. And it doesn't matter whether that's Royal Caves, whatever, down at North Shields, a place Eve knows, and so do I, and anybody who has any knowledge of the River Tyne will know something about its history, especially when you're a young lad and you're standing on Tyne Commission Quay watching the Norwegian boats going out, the days of the Leader and a few more. I don't think you'd remember that, but it's going back to the days where we had Norwegian sailings, and it was always good fun, and I loved it to bits. And I will never have it any other way. Anyway, enough of the sentimentality of all this, right? It's a way of saying when a trailer leaves for the continent, it's already got to be pre-cleared. So it wouldn't matter whether it's DFDS, North Shields into Eyemouth, or whether it's Immingham or Hull or anywhere else, or Teesport even. It's got to be pre-cleared. And that means that that information has already had to have gone to the Brussels computer so that the computer can actually clear it in advance and say, I've no problem with that, clear to load, you can get the trailer on board the ferry. So you see, in reality, we are now faced with far more bureaucracy than we've ever had to deal with before. There's issues such as origin. And again, the Chamber's here to help. Leslie Forrester is extremely good at what she does. And she would be able to tell you all about certificates of origin if there's a need for them. If you're using an invoice, the invoice statements, we hereby declare that the goods are of UK origin unless otherwise stated, plus the ORI number. These wonderful words, ORI, so it goes on, never mind. The point being about all this, that there's got to be due diligence on the part of the exporter. Make sure your information is correct, because without it, your consignment might not even get to the customer, or even if it does, they might end up paying import duty on it. which is not what they want to do. So you see, the duty of care is becoming more and more on your patch. And then it means that at least you know that the goods are going to get there because you've made sure that all the information is correct. And this is now a prerequisite. At the beginning of this year, it was decided that there wasn't going to be the need for certificates of origin for Europe, but that the invoice would have to have the statements on board it, plus your EORI number. And that looks like it's here to stay for the time being. But it does mean more emphasis yet again on things like full commercial invoices and the information thereon, including commodity codes. Now, although I haven't included a slide on it, I can safely tell you this, that what is required is not so much a full commodity code. It can be used for the EU, but it should normally be the 6-digit harmonized system code, because then it doesn't leave any room for doubt. The importer still has to use their tariff to declare the goods for import purposes. So yet again, a subtlety that has not been fully disseminated, but is still there. And it's there mainly for security purposes and effectively the use of the international tariffs as they are. Now, the next one, of course, proof of shipment for VAT, and this is where we come down to the declaration itself, as well as the transport document. And this more and more is an issue that HMRC are picking up, because they need to know that your shipment has indeed left the UK. The rule on 3 months say that you can get your documentation within a 3-month period following the shipment is still there. That does remain. But that you need to have a combination of the transport document and the declaration, or at least reference to it by means of the unique consignment reference. So that again is a game changer. This now means more paperwork, and it certainly means more due diligence. So this is very much something that you need to look at. You might not have even have had half the declarations last year because of the transition period. Well, now you do need them because of full compliance. And it's this magic word compliance yet again. Now then, declarations. And no, this is not a proper training course, so I'm not here to take you through the why and the wherefore of every document there is. But the latest turn of the screw is that not just a declaration, because a declaration is in fact the acknowledgement that the consignment has been declared to customs for export, but it doesn't say it's been exported itself. The exporter must have a copy, whether it's a simplified declaration or a full declaration doesn't matter, but the exporter needs a copy of it. And this is mainly for VAT zero rating purposes. And it's got to have a unique consignment reference number on it. But now these two things at the bottom are crucial, and they are coming up time after time after time. Trailer loads go through ferry ports that do not necessarily have a link to the customs computer. Most ports are, and I don't know how many of you have ever come across these terms, are either inventory linked or non-inventory. Ports such as Southampton, Felixstowe, Liverpool, the likes are what we call inventory linked because they have the customs software, or the software, shall I say, that deals with the processing of cargo. It's known as cargo processing software, but it links with the customs computer because it enables manifests and declarations to be input electronically and then sent automatically to the customs computer. So it would mean that a container, for example, comes out of Cumbria. It's got its export declaration raised by the agent at the time, but when it gets to the port, the shipping agent is going to put in a message saying container's got to the port. It's what we call an arrival message. And the computer then says, no problem, clear to load, and that container gets on the ship. There's a departure message that says the ship's ready to depart and can therefore go. And the final message, which we call the S8, which says the goods have left the UK, exports done, pure and simple. And that's the normal sequence. However, that of course is relying on containers going to ports and sitting there for a few hours before it gets loaded, somewhere like Felixstowe or Southampton. But if you're a trailer though, that's not going to happen, because the trailer goes to the port, enters the port, and basically sits in its bay until it goes on the ferry, which is usually no more than about an hour away. So it means the trailer goes across to somewhere like Hull, gets into the port, it's all the formalities done, it then goes straight on the ferry, and 9 o'clock that ferry's off to Rotterdam. Well, the thing about that is it's all automated and there is no specific procedure, because it is assumed that everything's been cleared. Well, with a non-inventory port, that's not the case, because no messages are effectively going through to the customs computer. Once that ferry's got to the port, that should all have been done. So what we have is what is called a pre-arrived declaration. Now, if you don't get the declarations, how do you know all that's happened? The answer is you don't. So that means that you've got to get the agents to do the declaration, pre-arrive it. So on the top of the declaration, it says EX and then A. And the letter A means pre-arrived. That trailer can now go on the ferry unless a specific instruction is given that says it needs to be examined or the documentation needs to be checked, because that does happen quite a lot. And the thing is, you wouldn't know that was happening because the agents probably wouldn't have told you. You don't even see it on the declaration if you don't get a copy of it. And a lot of cases are now happening where Border Force is sending letters to the exporter saying, has your consignment been shipped? Well, you don't know, do you? Especially when we were supposed to have checked the documentation of it before it went on the ferry. Oops. So that means the procedure wasn't fully carried out. And that could be a problem, because Border Force will then put that company's VAT number on the list of, should we say, higher risk companies, because they're not getting the information through. And that leads to more monitoring and more checks than ever before. So it means that the computer would pick up your VAT number and say, oh, you've not been telling us about your consignments, therefore we're going to have to start examining them. And that's the last thing you want. And that's why delays are occurring, because that information has not been getting through to the customs computer. And what's actually happening is that that trailer won't be going any further than the port gates, or will be directed to the port office, and the driver must present his paperwork before that trailer gets anywhere near the ferry. And this is why we're having huge problems now with a lack of continuity of information, and why things are getting held up, because there was not a proper set of instructions issued, or that the authorities were saying we need to check that paperwork, either because the exporter's VAT number, or because the nature of the cargo, or wherever it's going. So all this now has got to be done before that trailer either leaves the company's premises or before it gets to the trailer port, because it's all got to be done and dusted before that trailer gets anywhere near the dock office, that therefore allows it to continue and get on the ferry. So you see, again, all this is now changing. It's automated clearance, but it has to be done in accordance with customs requirements for checks and examinations wherever appropriate, because it's basically down to what we call a routing system, R. You can have R1, which is a documentary check, R2, which is a full physical examination, or R6, which is what you want, which is clear to load, clearance without examination. And the only way you'll know that is if you get a copy of the entry, and therefore tell the driver you've got to stop at the port office to get those documents checked before you can get on the ferry. So you see, with container loads, it's exactly as it has been ever since the electronic declarations came in 2002. But for ferry services, it is very, very different and demands a lot more due diligence. So you see from that, the main problems are no evidence of decoration, no evidence of port controls, route messages not being received, and then the goods leaving the UK without the appropriate checks, which HMRC are not going to have. They demand that the checks be available or made as the case may be. So you see, on all this, what we're dealing with now is a scenario where there is a greater need for due diligence than ever before. And that's why these updates are necessary, so that you know what you now have to do. Now, it may be completely against the system. It may be something you've never thought of up to now, but this is why, as I said from the outset, planning and review, because this is now the way forward. And this is now why it's as good a time as any for you to start looking at your systems and saying, are we prepared for this? Are we actually doing it properly? You see, this is the sequence, and I'm not going to go through it because I've already explained it. But these slides are available to you. Eve has got a copy, and if you want, please ask her and she will send it out to you. But it's all part of the overall structure. And this is why there has to be now a proper set of procedures in place in the company to deal with all this, because this is standard practice and this is what HMRC require of you. Now, they've not told you this, of course. They would expect you to look at the websites and see for yourselves, but this is the stark reality, that it now means that the exporter's got far more to do in terms of compliance and procedures to make sure that they've got the systems in place to make sure that nothing goes wrong. Now, the good news is we're here to help with it. One of the functions that I deal with is setting up procedures for companies to actually deal with these major movements, all these formalities. He's already got copies of sample procedures as I send out, because these were done for companies that have applied for funding and have been using the chamber to help them in developing their systems. And Eve, of course, deals with business growth and development. And the one thing we're here to do, this is where I commit to it, to help you develop the business in such a way that you have your procedures in place, that you know what you're doing. So for every shipment, you have a proper set of procedures to deal with all aspects of exporting, etc. So don't let it worry you that these things are happening, in the sense that we're here to help you. We're here to make sure that you move forward and that you have the least possible hassle. That's all right, another call. That basically you have the systems in place to avoid these problems, because you can be sure these problems are occurring all the time. And I and Eve and Tracy want to make sure that you set up in such a way that the problems won't happen. Or if they do, it's very rare. You can be confident in what you're doing. You have everything in place so that moving forward, you are prepared for whatever the circumstances, and that you can drive the whole process, whether it's agents, whether it's customs, whether it's carriers, couriers, doesn't matter. You are in control, because that's what it amounts to. So you see, in reality, there is a rhyme and reason to it. But as long as you're in tune with that and you've got the procedures in place, it shouldn't go wrong. Now, I know it means a bit more paperwork, a bit more sitting down and actually going through it. But believe you me, in the long term, it's an investment. And it means that you are prepared for whatever happens. So you see, those are the main issues. I've already gone into them largely, but effectively it means that many ports in this country are not equipped to deal straight away through customs, and that's why these procedures have to be carried out in advance of the trailer getting to the port and getting on the ferry. Now, in the future, there may be new developments concerning inventory-linked ports, and it may well be that customs is going to have a system in place that will deal with pre-clearances in such a way that it's automatically done anyway. It hasn't arrived yet, but this is going to happen eventually, that everything would be pre-cleared. So in reality, your agents would have to deal with this, whether they like it or not, because I don't think you could be expected to do it because you don't have the links with the customs computers, whereas agents generally do, but it means that they're going to have to get their act in order concerning all the relevant facilities there are, concerning all the necessary procedures that there are to make sure that the job gets done, and you'll have the job to make sure they do it. So in reality, you see, all these areas have come in now with vengeance, and they've all started in the past few months, but it was all consolidated at the beginning of this year to say, right, this is the procedure that you now have to take in order to make sure that your consignment gets out of the country and gets to its destination. Now, on top of this, something you may already be told about by your agents called GVMS, the Goods Vehicle Movement System. And this applies to Northern Ireland as much as it does to Europe, because it concerns trailers, their registration, and the need to pre-clear cargoes using the trailer manifest, and then get the correct reference numbers in so that you have the details of the pre-clearance to be put onto any documentation that's necessary, whether it's a declaration or whether it's a transport document, or simply to have it there as an internal reference for that transaction. Suffice to say, every consignment needs what we call a GMR, a Goods Movement Reference Number. And that is a requirement because the trailer can't get on the ferry unless it has one. Now, again, this may come as a shock to the system because it's never been needed before. Well, it's all part of the safety and security system that's now being developed, and it is an essential for all trailer movements between here and either the Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, or the continent. Now, I don't think it applies to Norway because Norway is not in the community. But again, I stand corrected if it is the case, because again, it could be a North Sea crossing. But certainly for Europe, it is a prerequisite. And it means that one of the jobs you now have to do is to make sure that there is a goods movement reference for everything that is going between here and the continent, because it's a reference number to your consignment on board a trailer, in the same way that all other trailer consignments will have to have a GMR as well. So on top of this, electronic export transaction records, which I keep telling people, I think Eva may have sent you copies of them already. She's nodding her head, they probably have, but we are there to, again, supply them on to you to use for as a template basically for all your export transactions. HMRC require it. They now require you to have an Excel spreadsheet for all of your export transactions. And by the way, if you're trading with Northern Ireland, you need a separate spreadsheet for that because it uses your XI EORI number for all shipments across to not the Republic, to the North. But the point being, this is now a requirement by HMRC, and they do require you to have spreadsheet records for this purpose so that you can check all your consignments going out the door for exports in Northern Ireland and make sure that you've got them recorded and that they refer to particular dates, particular shipments, reference numbers, declarations, and the list goes on. And documented standard operating procedures. Again, this never used to be the case, but HMRC now require it because since everything is subject to customs controls, HMRC need to know that you understand what procedures are and that you have a set of documented export procedures in-house so that all the staff involved can use them. Now, it could mean there's only one person dealing with the export process, fine, but they still need to have the procedures. If you have a team of people dealing with exports, then most certainly you do need to have the procedures basically to be handled and used by every member of staff involved in the export process. So in reality now, if you're applying for a particular customs facility they will ask you straight away, do you have a set of documented export or import standard operating procedures, which you've got to have, and what's more, they demand the right to see them if they want. So you can't just say, oh yes we do, and then of course you've got nothing in place. They need to see them. It's partly because of ISO regulations and benchmarks, but it's also because HMRC have now insisted on it, because they need to know that you understand the basic export process and or the import process, as the case may be. So in reality, you need a set of SOPs for imports and a set of SOPs for exports as well. So you see, all in all, the requirements now are far, far greater than ever before. Yes, I know people are going to say, oh, but we never had to do this when we're in the single market. I know, but we're not in the single market anymore. And this is why HMRC have insisted on all this. I mentioned about certs of origin, and I don't need to go through those again, but there's the statement. And that's basically now what is happening in terms of documentation and basically proof of origin. So again, now is the time for review. And if necessary, come and talk to us, talk to Leslie, talk to Eve or Tracy, and talk to myself. That's what we're here to advise you on. I mean, I'll be bringing Eve and Tracy up to speed on a lot of new developments anyway, because part of business growth is understanding the needs of the company, but it's also understanding what the requirements are in terms of government, in terms of trade procedures, etc. And believe you me, it took me long enough to learn them, and I was in the department. So you can imagine what it's like for any traders or even any business advisors, because sooner or later these topics do come up, and then how do we deal with them? Origin compliance, I've said proof of origin, long-term suppliers declarations. More and more we're seeing customers on the continent asking traders here to provide suppliers declarations to prove that the consignment originated in the UK. It's ongoing. It's not something that comes in overnight and leaves overnight. The customer wants it for security purposes and also for assurance purposes to say, yes, the consignment did indeed originate in the UK. Now then, IOSS, in response to one or two people, Helen and one or two more, there is no HMRC portal as yet. This has not been done. HMRC originally said they were going to, but they've reneged on that. Why they've done, I don't know. It will become a necessity eventually, but I think HMRC is saying we've neither the time nor the resources. Which means that everything going through the continent by parcel post goes by way of a courier who adds on the freight charges, the transport charges, and presents those to the customer along with the VAT. Well, the higher those charges, the more VAT the customer is having to pay. This is supposed to get rid of it in the sense of the prepayment of VAT, etc., to avoid these charges. Well, it hasn't happened yet, and don't hold your breath. We don't know when it will happen, but it still means due diligence, because we need to know what the charges are to the customer and then notify the customer it is going to cost X amount. Because let's say you're paying for that ship, that you will be charged the freight charges. But the thing is, you see, you then charge the customer, and then the VAT would be payable anyway on the continent. Because if the customer isn't VAT registered, they can't claim the VAT back. And that could be a problem. And this is why we need to know, and this is where there will be a separate course eventually on this, the need to find out, is your customer actually VAT registered? This, I think, Eve, is where we're going to deal with the e-commerce course, looking at things like, is it business to customer? Is it business to business? Is your customer VAT registered? How do we deal with these processes? Because this is a lot of what companies have to deal with. You may well send out a bottle of whiskey, for example. You may send out a particular individual item. It could be that the customer emails you anyway and pays for the product by credit card, and all you do is put it in the cart and send it off to them. Well, so be it. But it still comes down to who is your customer? Are they VAT registered or not? What are they going to have to pay? Because you still have to deal with this as a control mechanism to determine how much is actually costing to get this item on a UPS van or Hermes or DPD, whatever, and get it sent to the continent, because somebody has to pay. So this is an issue we do need to look at seriously, because it's costing money, and it can cost serious money. So in reality, IOSS is an area we're still playing with, tangled up in, and nobody seems to have any answers. More and more AU VAT numbers are becoming the issue, because if you're being asked by your customer to arrange delivered duty paid, the chances are you're going to need a European VAT number anyway. And also because, let's suppose you are offering services such as installation charges and whatever in the country of import, in the country of receipt of the goods, let's say, or receipt of the service, you do have to charge VAT at the local rates. Now, again, this is an area that I deal with separately on the VAT course. But suffice to say, it's affecting a lot of companies, because they are now being told you need to have a VAT number because of the customers you're dealing with. And that means you've got to apply for maybe 1 or 2 VAT numbers. It could be in Holland, it could be in France, it could be in Germany. But the point is, you then have to apply for a VAT number so you can charge your customer the local VAT. And that means local VAT returns, and so it goes on. And this is why, yet again, this whole issue of what does the customer require? Because if the customer says this is what they want you to do, you'll probably have to do it anyway. But it then means, oh, we've got to apply for a VAT number elsewhere. And then you get asked by the authority, are you trading in this country? Are you physically selling goods in this country? Are you supplying services in this country? And also because several of the applications now incorporate a tax registration number. It does in Ireland for a start. It now does in the Netherlands and elsewhere. So you don't just apply for a VAT number, you actually apply for a tax registration number and possibly an EORI number as well, all rolled into one. So yet again, what are you required to do? Is it a necessity? Do you need one? Because if you do, there's more work to be done. It means, therefore, depending upon how many countries in the EU you deal with, would you need to have an individual VAT number for that particular country? And again, we're here to advise you, because part of my function is VAT as much as it is customs. And we are willing to help, even if it means helping you to do that application in the first place, and then being able to maintain it and operate it accordingly. So don't let that worry you. We're here to help you to get that process underway. As I mentioned earlier, in some cases, there's a one-stop shop. This company in France also uses fiscal representation. They make a charge of around about €200 per VAT return, which isn't actually bad. But it means that you can have the whole operation taken out of your hands to make it easier. Yes, there's a fee, but if it means peace of mind, and that you know you can operate according to that particular country's VAT rules, then better still, you don't have that worry of trying to do it yourself. Temporary exports, I put it in because the number of companies now sending goods out for export, and then they come back for repair or refurbishment or whatever. So we've got to bring them back into the UK and then either bring them back into stock or else send them out once we've repaired them. I don't expect you to understand all of this. I have a separate approach to it. There is part of one of the training courses that deals with it, but it's a separate procedure that I do specialize in. And if any of you do need advice on this, please do come to us and we'll be able to help you with it. There are specific facilities which you need to know, but it's an ad hoc system. It's based on the fact that you need to bring goods back in, not because it is actually part of your business. So don't let that worry you. It is something that can be taken care of separately according to your needs, but you can be sure that there is a specific process involved. Let's say you send the engineers out with tools, they're going to do a job in Ireland and back they come. Is there a declaration process? Yes, there is, but we can deal with it according to the need. and however often it has to take place. So in reality, this is now a major issue since we've left the community, and therefore what procedure is required to actually deal with it. Alongside it, the use of ATA carnets, they are more prevalent than before, usually applied for through the London Chamber of Commerce. They cost in the region of 300 quid. You have a website facility to actually apply for one, but again, it depends upon the need. Is there a need to actually have a carnet, or can we do things another way? Because carnets cost money, although they do supply all the coupons for each individual part of the movement. But again, it depends upon your need. And again, don't just jump into it because it's there. Look at the need to say, do we actually need one? Or is there an alternative procedure we can use, such as temporary exports, whatever, return goods relief to cover this? So yet again, plan ahead. Look to see if it's necessary. Do we need to send things out of the country and then bring them back in later on? Because it depends on what the need is. The spreadsheets I've already talked about. This is now a necessity, and it's something which, if you're not doing already, you need to start doing now. We have the templates to send out. We will gladly do so. Let us know if you need one, because these are the bits of information you'd have to put on the spreadsheet anyway on a regular basis for each individual consignment, because you need to be sure when the consignment was dispatched, how it was dispatched, all the other details to do with it, because this again is a requirement by our good old HMRC friends. And they do ask sometimes for you to upload these sort of spreadsheets so they can have a look at them, because they're not going to get in the cars and go and visit you because they've not got any money, and the chances are they've been working from home for long enough anyway. So they don't as such visit companies anymore. They do everything by distance from their offices, and they would probably want you to send the details to them for verification of all your export transactions, and for that matter, import transactions as well. So those are the basic details. As I said, we'll send the templates out to you so you can then see how it actually works on paper. So as a summary, and this is now very much flavour of the month, compliance, compliance, compliance. Evidence of shipment, your declarations which you need, evidence of clearance, and that you very much need because of the use of ferries and trailers. Correct information of all your consignments. Are they recorded? Can you go back to them as needed in case there is a need to do so? The tracking process, I know a lot's done by RFID, tracking numbers, etc. But this is the way a lot of the couriers work, and therefore you should be able to gain access to the websites and be able to check on a consignment using its serial number. But that does not substitute for documentation and absolute proof that shipments have been removed from the UK and that the paperwork reflects it, because things still have a habit of going missing, and you still may have a tracking number, but the consignment's nowhere to be found. It's sitting in a German warehouse where somebody forgot it, and that won't be the first time either. And then the overall summary, and this is now crucial, it's a combination of your paperwork, your commercial documentation, which has got to be absolutely in place, export declarations, which equally have to be there, the arrival status, the pre-arrival, that is, for your ferry and trailer shipments, to make sure that they were properly entered before they go on the ferry. The evidence of the customs routing, this is the Route 1, Route 2, Route 6. The GMR reference numbers, and again, you need them now. There's no way you can get shipments made unless they do have a goods movement reference number. Your record keeping, of course, and your documented export procedures. Now, I know it seems a lot, and a lot of this will be very new to you, but these are now the requirements, and this is why the Chamber is making this initiative to tell you what you need, because we're here to help you with this. Now, some of you know I already do compliance audits. They're 1.5 days in length, half day with the company, and then the other day writing up reports, recommendations, and risk analyses. But on from that, what remedial work is to be done. And this pretty well always takes in the record keeping and the documented SOPs and anything else you need to do, such as regular reviews, such as staff awareness. And believe you me, we will be doing a lot more with our training because this is now a necessity. Eve has been in touch with BCC, with our friend Paul Writing, and Paul has said the same thing. In fact, what he's done is he sent the details of the accredited courses, which we are now going to be running. And I know Eve probably can say rather more about it, but suffice to say, we are now becoming more serious. The term on CNN News, Quest means business. Well, I'm not Richard Quest, but I still mean business. Because let's get this properly done. Because if we do, it means you have less problems. We will help you to streamline, but stimulate your export potential. Make sure you're on the straight and narrow, but help you to get better deals in place because of awareness, understanding of procedures, and overall compliance to say, we can do this. I'm one of these that believes in positive thinking. Anybody who gives me one negative reason why they can't, I will find 10 reasons why you can, should, and will do the job better. Because that's what I believe in. I'm passionate about it, as many of you know. I live and breathe this. This is my profession. But like I said, it's my passion as well. And I want to help you, not just to get it right, but to do well out of it. Because exporting is a huge potential. The sky is the limit. And I want companies in Cumbria to take advantage of that. So there you are. There is the presentation. It is available.
Thank you, Mark. That was great. That was a lot of information. What we're going to do, I know that we are planned in to finish at 11:30, but I know there's quite a lot of questions. So I'm going to stop the recording and this will be on our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to watch it back. So I'll stop the recording now.